always run out of time. And I'm going to have to finish it up on Monday. I'm going to have to like wrap up some loose ends on Monday.
Time up.
So it's become a thing, right? Killing Lincoln every year. And it's a fun story to tell because it is a crazy story. And there are a bunch of like side stories, people who were involved and what happened to them. And that's why I like teaching history, right? It's the stories. And so this one, the more I started teaching classes about the assassination, then the more research I started doing and the more you learn about it. And it's just all of these weird, crazy stories. And then it became a thing where people were like, you know, when are you going to kill Lincoln and stuff like that. And so then I was like, people wanted to come back and see it after they had seen it already earlier in the day or previous years. And so then I was like, well, let me go ahead and just do it in the black box. And I could have props and chairs and stuff like that. And so then I started doing it in the black box. So then I'm always nervous it's not going to live up to the hype. So I apologize if it's not as amazing as you heard it was. But it's still a really good story, if nothing else. The story and the stories connected to it are so crazy that if you didn't know it was true, you would just think it was completely unbelievable. Like if somebody just made this as a movie, you would walk out of the theater and you'd be like, there's no way that could happen, right? But it is all true, I promise, it's all true. Sometimes there are conflicting eyewitness accounts and conflicting stories about what happened at certain points. And anytime that happened, I'll either tell you that there are 2 or 3 theories about this or 2 or 3 versions of that, or sometimes I just pick the one I like best, and that's the one I'm going to tell you, right? So if you do some research or you read some books after this, or there's a bunch of documentaries about it, and the story's a little bit different than the way I tell it, I'm not lying to you. There's a source somewhere that says it the way I said it, and you can believe who you want to believe, right? They're not major facts. The major facts we know about. And of course, it's the first time a president was ever assassinated. And it's Abraham Lincoln who got us through the Civil War, and it happens at the very end of the Civil War. So when you put those things together, there has been a ton of research, and they interviewed hundreds of people after it happened to try to catch who did it and try to find out more about why it happened and how it happened. And so there's a lot of scholarship and there's a lot of information about it. So we know some crazy details about what happened the days leading up to and the days immediately after. So, and again, this wasn't set up quite how I asked for it, so we're just going to kind of deal with the picture being a little bit small and be moving back and forth. We already know Lee surrenders April of 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse, and that signals the end of the war. It's not the official end of the war. There's still an army in Tennessee, a Southern army in Tennessee running around, and the Confederates had not surrendered yet as a country. They hadn't given up, but everybody knows it's the end. Everybody knows the end is coming once Lee surrenders. And so Washington, D.C. is jubilant. It's happy. There's on the night of April 13th, there's this like candlelight vigil. Everybody in the city puts lamps in their windows, and people are marching down the street holding lanterns and torches. When people wrote about it, the newspaper accounts say it was beautiful. Like they just light up the whole city. Lincoln comes out onto the balcony of the White House and makes this speech. Back then, you could just walk right up to the White House at any time. And he makes this speech about the end of the war and trying to come back together in peace and ending slavery and all of those things. And so it's a really happy time. You guys have all seen pictures of presidents before they were president and after they're president, right? Whether they were president for 4 years or 8 years, it always looks like they aged like 3 times as long, doesn't it? Right? being president is extremely stressful. Being president during the Civil War is even more stressful. And I've mentioned before, it's tricky to go back and try and diagnose historical figures, but there's a pretty good consensus that Lincoln probably suffered from depression, at least during the time he was president. And remember, they had 4 sons. 2 of them died very young. One before he was elected president, and one while they were living in the White House and he was president. And he's dealing with the Civil War. He's dealing with the country being torn apart. And so for the 4 years that he's president, it really wears on him. He was always skinny, but he loses weight. He looks much older. He's kind of just burdened by the war. And after Lee surrenders, everybody close to the Lincolns, everybody who worked in the White House said you could see a difference almost immediately. Right? Lincoln looks better. He looks happier. He goes on a carriage ride with his wife, and the carriage driver later reported that it's like the happiest he had ever seen them. They're talking about plans for after the war, where are they going to travel to, right? Maybe they're going to go to Europe. Lincoln wants to see Jerusalem. He's deeply religious. He wants to see the Holy Land. And so they're making these plans for the future. And then professionally, he's talking to his cabinet about Reconstruction. He wants to put the country back together quickly as possible. He wants to let the South back in. He doesn't want to punish the South. And so he's making all of these plans. In those plans is a plan to go to the theater. Originally, they were going to go to Grosvenor's Theater and see Aladdin. Later, they changed their plans, and their son, Tad, and their older son, Tad, is about 10 years old at this point, and Robert is like 18 or 19. He had served on Grant's staff, and he's home after the surrender. And they are going to go see Aladdin, and Lincoln and Mary are going to go see My American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Who's been to Washington, D.C.? Now, this is probably a silly question, but when you went, did any of you have to actually drive in the city, or were you not driving there? No. All right, so, but even walking around D.C., walking or driving, did you get a sense for how hard it is to navigate Washington, D.C.? It's a very confusing city. You can see, it's a little far away, the map in the upper right-hand corner. That's the map from 1865, from the 1860s. And so you can see it's on a grid, but then it has these diagonal lines cutting through it. And so the city is cut up into these quadrants. So a lot of those streets are like Pennsylvania Avenue Southwest, Nebraska Avenue Northwest, like that. And so it's really confusing to get around, and that's going to play a part later. The picture in the lower left is Washington, D.C. in 1865. That's the Washington Monument. It's only about a third of the way built. And by the way, if you noticed when you were there, or if you go and you notice, it's 2 different colors. Mm-hmm. That's because they stopped construction during the war. When they restart construction after the war, they get the granite from a different quarry. So it's 2 different stones.
I went in 5th grade and they didn't even have it finished yet.
The Washington Monument?
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Dog.
They've done it for a really long time. They might have been working on it, yeah. That earthquake years ago did some damage to it.
Didn't you remember?
Yeah,
5th grade
yeah, it got finished.
was not done.
It's been closed at different times, and they've had to do repairs and stuff like that.
Jack showing me which ones have done that.
But look around it, right? There's no buildings. Right? Washington, D.C. was a much different place. It was more of a big town than a city in the 1860s. Right? There's nothing there. The White House is up this way, over here. Now all of this is still there except for the mall, the big grass area leading down that way. So let's What did he do for a living?
Kill people.
He's an actor. He's a very well-known actor from a well-known acting family. His dad was a famous actor, his older brother was a famous actor, and so he's in the family business. Now his dad and brother were even more famous, and they're famous for doing Shakespeare. John Wilkes Booth, Shakespeare's not really his thing. Right? So he carves out a different niche for himself. He's like an action star. His whole thing is his fight scenes and his gymnastics and acrobatics that he does on stage. He's a very physical actor. And he was considered good looking. Women were in love with him. They would buy his photograph to take home. Kind of like some of you probably have posters of actors or singers and stuff that you think are hot up in your
Yeah,
room.
like Super Mario.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a good looking guy. That
Jack has
mustache,
one.
man. All right,
I have
so
a poster of Messi.
John Wilkes Booth is a famous actor. Any door would be open to him. He easily could have went to the White House and said, "I'd like to see the president," and nobody would have thought twice of it. They would have let him right into the president's office. There is really no presidential security at this time. Every day, the president set aside time to just meet people from the public. People would just line up. You could just walk up to the White House and knock on the front door and say, "I'd like to see the president," and they would just put you in a line, and when it was your turn, you could just walk in and say hi to the president and tell him your problems. There were rumors of plots to kill Lincoln all during the war, and Lincoln said, "You know what, if somebody is willing to trade their life for mine, there's really nothing we can do about it. I'm not going to live that way," and so he just refused to worry about it. He would travel alone often. There's one account that a sniper actually took a shot at him and shot his hat off of his head. So he missed assassination, by a few inches in that instance. Eventually, they do assign one federal marshal to the president. There's 4 assigned to him, but one at a time. There's supposed to be one guard with him at all times. But he travels unaccompanied a lot, so it drove people crazy. But he decided he just wasn't going to live in fear of getting killed. So Booth sides with the South. He's from Maryland. It's a slave state. It stays loyal to the Union, but he believes in the South. The whole idea of the Southern gentleman and the Southern cause appeals to him. He thinks slavery is good for black people, the whole 9 yards. He's all in on the South. So he hates Lincoln, and he hates the North. But he feels like as the war grinds on, he feels like he hasn't done his part, that people are going to think he's a coward, that he's all talk. So he's trying to think of a way he can help the South. And he meets this guy, John Surratt, who's a courier for the Confederacy. He sneaks messages back and forth across the lines. And through John Surratt, he meets these other guys. And they start meeting in this house, the Surratt boarding house. John Surratt's mom is Mary Surratt, and she owns this house. And somebody last period asked exactly what a boarding house is, and the best way to describe it now is like it's an Airbnb. Like they rent out rooms to people. So Mary Surratt rents these rooms. And so John Surratt and John Wilkes Booth and these other guys start meeting in this house, and they hatch this plot to kidnap Abraham Lincoln. It starts as a kidnapping plot. And the idea is if we kidnap the president, then we can ransom him back to the South in exchange for prisoners of war. Remember, the South has fewer men. So they've got thousands of men are prisoner. They think if they can get them back, then they can rejoin the Southern Army, and the Southern Army can continue to fight. Well, once Lee surrenders, that plan's out the window. So first kind of weird coincidence story. When it's a kidnapping plot, Booth hears that Lincoln is going to go to this hospital for wounded soldiers and visit them outside of Washington, D.C. And there's really only one way to go. There's one clear route there. So he says, here's our chance to kidnap the president. So him and his friends, these co-conspirators, ride out and they set up an ambush on the road. They're going to kidnap the president. And they wait there all day. The president doesn't show up. So Booth, all dejected, he missed his chance. He rides home, goes to the hotel where he's staying, walks in the door, and there's all this excitement and hubbub going on. And he's like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, the president was here. So while they were waiting to kidnap him out on the road, he changed his plans and actually went to visit some veterans in the hotel where Booth was staying. So if he had stayed home, he would have had a shot at kidnapping the president. Once Lee surrenders, kidnapping's out the window, and Booth starts thinking about assassinating Lincoln. So he's waiting for his opportunity now. He's waiting for an opening. The black and white picture is the Surratt boarding house in 1865. The color picture is the Surratt boarding house today. It's still there. And I stumbled upon it by accident. I used to take my 8th graders to Washington, D.C. every year, and one year we went to Ford's Theater to see where Lincoln was shot. We go to the Peterson House to see where he died. And if you continue walking up the street and hang a right, you're in Chinatown. And so I decided we would go to Chinatown for dinner. And we go up and we turn, there's the big wooden gate leading into Chinatown. And we don't have reservations or anything like that. We're just looking for some place that looks cool. We're going to go in and eat. So I see that blue awning as we're walking down the street. And the name of the restaurant is Rock and Roll.
Yes, sir.
Now, we're all Call of Zeus fans. I love a pun. So I'm like, that's where we're eating.
Good stuff. Wait, how is it spelled?
Wok, W-O-K.
Yeah,
Rock
like
and Roll.
dish. The big metal.
And so I walk right past it, and one of my students says, Mr. Yodice, look. And I step back out, and that plaque is there, and it's that building. It's where they plotted the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So we did it by accident the first time, but every year after that, we had like a Lincoln Day. And we would go to Ford's Theater and see where he was shot. We'd go to the Peterson House and see where he died. And then we went to eat Chinese food in the place where they plotted his assassination. So if you travel to Washington, D.C. and you want to know where all these places are, I'll tell you, you can have your own Lincoln Day. Booth wasn't prepared, but he winds up attending, or in the crowd at Lincoln's second inaugural address. The blue circle is Lincoln giving his speech that inauguration day, and the red circle is John Wilkes Booth. He was that close to the president. And he goes home and writes in his journal, what an excellent chance I had if I wished to kill the president on inauguration day. Right? But he didn't have a gun, he didn't have a weapon. Right? But he's that close to the president at his second inauguration. So here are the players. Right? John Wilkes Booth, there on the left. Then upper left is Lewis Powell or Lewis Payne. He had a couple of different aliases. A Confederate veteran and a big, strong, powerful guy. Right? And that's going to play into things later. George Axelrod is the guy with the hat on. Mary Surratt down in the corner, and David Harold down lower right. And they all have a part to play. Now, Booth's idea, he's an actor, he's full of himself, he's very dramatic, and so he doesn't want to just kill the president. He wants to do it in public, in a dramatic way, and he wants to kill a whole bunch of people. He wants to kill President Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant himself while they're at the theater. And then he's going to send David Harold to kill Andrew Johnson. Right? He's the third guy in with the note underneath him. I'll come to that in a minute. And he's going to send Lewis Powell to kill Secretary of State Seward. The guy on the end there, not the couple. The guy right before the couple. The note under Andrew Johnson is a handwritten note, a calling card from John Wilkes Booth, who went to Andrew Johnson's hotel. This is how different things were. The vice president just lived in a hotel in Washington, D.C. And everybody knew which hotel, and it wouldn't have been hard to figure out which room he was in. And John Wilkes Booth leaves a card, I came by to see if you were in, John Wilkes Booth. There's no way to know why he left that card. Some people think he was just there to see if the vice president was going to be home that night. Some people think he thought that the vice president might get away, might not get killed, and he wanted to implicate the vice president in the conspiracy somehow, right, to discredit him. There's no way to know why he left the note, but he left this cryptic note.
Can't we just ask him?
Ulysses S. Grant and his wife Julia, at the last minute, decline the invitation of the Lincolns. They say, we're not going to come to the theater with you tonight. We're going to go to Pennsylvania to visit our sons. Probably because Julia Grant and Mary Todd Lincoln did not get along very well. Mary Todd Lincoln was a difficult woman to get along with. She probably battled with mental illness, and she was very jealous of the president. So she just didn't get along with other women very well at all. And so when the Grants bow out, the Lincolns actually invite a couple of other people, and they all decline the invitation. Until they get to Mary Todd Lincoln's friend Clara Harris, a younger woman. She's the daughter of a senator, and her fiance, Major Rathbone. So they're going to go to Ford's Theater with the Lincolns that night. So, I'll start with the least dramatic one. Vice President Johnson, David Harold is sent to kill him. George Atzerodt is sent to kill him. And Atzerodt's not really into the murder plot. He was in on the kidnapping plot. He's not really in on the murder plot. But Booth tells him, he says, you're already in it. Right? I've already written letters to the newspapers and stuff for after the deed is done telling our story. So you're already in it. So you might as well go through with it. Right? There's no chickening out now, so to speak. So Atzerodt goes to the hotel that night, and he goes to the tavern downstairs, and he's having a few drinks trying to get up his courage, and he never does. Right? He just goes home. Right? Has a few drinks and goes home. Chickens out, decides he doesn't want to do it, however you want to put it, just goes home. So the vice president is safe. Then we come to Secretary of State Seward and Lewis Powell. So Seward, I know this sounds weird, but he had been in a carriage accident a few days earlier, like being in a car accident, right? We don't think of carriages getting in accidents, but actually the horse had gotten spooked, and the carriage turned over, and Secretary Stewart broke his jaw and broke his collarbone and broke his arm. And so he's in bad shape. He's all bandaged up. There's a splint on his face and a splint down his arm. And he's home recovering. And so the plan is David Harold knows Washington, D.C. well, and Lewis Powell does not. He's new to the town. And so Harold is going to take Powell to the Secretary of State's house with a package. And Harold had worked for a pharmacy. So he wraps the package up, and he says, go to the front door and tell them that this is medicine for the Secretary of State, and that you have to give specific instructions. And so Powell takes the package, and it's getting late. It's about 10:15, 10:30 on April 14th. And he goes and knocks on the door, and a servant answers the door. And again, Powell is a big, strong guy. And he says, I have a package from Dr. Verdi. I have to give it to the Secretary of State. I have to show him how to use this medicine. And the servant is like, people are going to bed. You can't come in. Just give it to me. And Powell does that thing when he keeps talking and walking, like ignoring the guy. And he's like, no, it's okay. I got to come in and give it to him, right? And kind of pushes his way past the servant. The Seward's house is big, and he doesn't know exactly where the Secretary of State is. So he's not really sure what he's going to do once he's in the house, but he figures he's got to go upstairs. So he goes up the stairs. And as he's walking up the stairs, the servant is behind him, kind of still saying, sir, you can't go up there, people are asleep or whatever. Powell gets to the top of the stairs, and Secretary of State Seward's son, Frederick, comes down the hall and meets him at the top of the stairs, and they go through the whole thing again, right? What are you doing? I got this medicine, give it to me, I can't. And they're going back and forth. At which point, the secretary's daughter sticks her head out the door and says, Frederick, what's going on? Father is trying to sleep. so now Powell knows where the secretary is. So the gun, the big gun in the picture, the reason I have this picture of this gun and a hand is to give it some scale. It's a big, heavy revolver, right? So my little cap gun doesn't do it justice. But it's a big, heavy gun. And he draws his gun and he points it right in Frederick Seward's face and he pulls the trigger. And nothing happens. It misfires. So then he takes that gun and he starts beating Frederick Seward in the head with it. He hits him so hard that he damages the gun. He bends the gun and fractures Frederick's skull. Drops him to the floor.
That's tough.
He turns and runs into the secretary's room. Pushes his daughter out of the way. Draws his knife. Slashes at the secretary's nurse. And then goes over to the bed and just starts stabbing the secretary. And he feels blood shoot up his arm. And he keeps stabbing. And Secretary of State Stewart kind of rolls off the bed and gets wedged between the wall and the bed, and Powell can't reach him anymore. So he turns around. At this point, another assistant had burst into the room, and he slashes at him, cuts him with the knife. Goes out of the room, and there's another person that works for the secretary at the top of the stairs, and he sees Powell coming out of the room with a bloody knife, and he turns around and starts running down the stairs. Powell comes up behind him and stabs him in the back. He crumbles to the floor. Powell jumps over him, runs out the front door, waving the bloody knife in the air, and he says, "I'm mad! I'm mad!" Looks around. David Harold's gone. He heard the commotion, heard the secretary's daughter screaming, "Murder, murder," and he takes off. Powell's lost. Right? He thinks he's just killed the Secretary of State and maybe some other people in the house, and he doesn't know where to go. So he just wanders off into the night, Washington, D.C. As it turns out, he didn't kill anybody. Secretary of State Seward, because of his broken jaw and all the bandages and the splinting, he didn't hit anything vital. He didn't cut his neck or hit any vital organs. So the secretary lives. Now, he did cut right through his cheek so that his cheek flapped open and you could see into his mouth. So he will be scarred and his face will be deformed for the rest of his life, but he does live. His son Frederick will also recover from the fractured skull, and the other people suffered relatively minor wounds. They all survived. So that takes care of Secretary Seward and Andrew Johnson. So now we get to Booth at Ford's Theater.
Ooh, can I play Lincoln?
Sure. Come sit in the rocking chair.
The rocking chair?
Yeah, the rocking chair. And it was a rocking chair. Mary Todd Lincoln sat in another chair.
I want to be
What?
someone.
You can be Mary Todd.
I want to be someone.
I'm out of chairs. Okay. Here.
Lincoln?
Yes.
Okay.
Hey,
Hey, you best play the. Oh, can I be John Wilkes Booth?
No.
No, I have to be John Wilkes. David, come be Major Rathbone.
Yes!
Is there any other, can I be someone?
You can come be Clara Harris. You
Can I
can
be
be
someone?
Beyonce.
Can I be one of the servant guys? Yes, sir.
All right.
Did you know a house somebody think I just did so?
So Lincoln.
Wait, which one do I sit on? This side or that side?
I'm not sure. There's like a couch. So in the box, Lincoln's in the rocking chair. Mary Todd's next to him in a big arm chair. And Clara Harris and Major Rathbone are on a couch along the side here. So,
I'm pretty sure that's playing a guy.
No, he's a girl.
John Wilkes
Major
Booth, that
Rathbone.
earlier that day, he goes and rents his horse, which also sounds weird. But you can rent a car today, you could rent a horse back then. So he goes and rents his horse. The stable owner tells him that the horse doesn't like to be tied up, right? That she likes to move. So when he rides up to the alley on the left-hand side of Ford's Theater there. And he knocks on the door, and one of the stagehands comes, and they all know John Wilkes Booth, the famous actor. So Booth says, come out here and hold my horse. And the guy's like, there's a play going on, I gotta move scenery and stuff, I can't stand here holding your horse. So he calls into the theater for Peanut. Peanut Burrows. His nickname is Peanut because sometimes that was his job in the theater. He sold peanuts. He's not the brightest guy in the world. I mean, he's an adult man who sells peanuts for a living. But totally innocent. And so Peanut comes out and the guy says, hold John Wilkes Booth's horse. He's like, I'm not holding the horse. He says, hold the horse. He says, fine, I'll hold the horse. So Peanut is walking the horse up and down the alley while he's waiting for John Wilkes Booth to return. Booth enters the theater. He says, can I go backstage to get around to the other side? And they're like, no, the way the scenery's set up, people will see you. You'll have to go underneath. So Booth goes through a trap door under the stage, goes across the theater, comes out on the right-hand side. He's too early. He knows the moment he's waiting for. He's got all of this planned out in his head. So attached to the theater on the right is a tavern. So he decides to go have a drink while he's waiting. He goes into the tavern. While he's in there, the Lincolns arrive at the play. The play had already begun. They arrive a little bit late. The orchestra stops, and the conductor acknowledges the president, and they play Hail to the Chief, and the audience all claps. Lincoln is very popular because the war is ending. And they go up and sit in their booth, and their balcony seats are the ones with the flags around them, and that's a portrait of George Washington hanging in the middle. And that's where they're sitting. You been to Fort Steele? I tell the story better than the part. So they're sitting in there. The guard that's supposed to be guarding the president helps them into the theater, brings them up to the booth, closes them up in there, and he figures they're not going anywhere until the play is over. And he goes to the tavern next door as well. So there's no way to know for sure, but the guy who's supposed to be guarding the president and the guy who's going to kill the president are in the same bar at the same time, the night that the president's going to get killed. So Booth figures it's about that time, and he leaves the bar, and he comes back into the theater, and he goes up the stairs, and he goes behind those chairs you can see to that first yellow door. Okay. What time is it? What's that time?
27.
8:9.
What is it?
You want to jump in there?
All right. All right. I'm still not going to be able to tell it all, but we'll finish it on Monday. So the way it's set up is there are two doors. There's a door, a little anteroom, and then another door into the balcony, right? So Booth comes up to the first door, and there's an usher sitting there. And he walks up and he presents his calling card to the usher, and the usher says, oh, it's the famous actor, John Wilkes Booth. Go right ahead. And so he goes through the first door. Now, earlier that day, he had visited the theater. That's how he found out the president was going to be at that performance that night. And once he finds out Lincoln's going to be there, he goes into the theater and he arranges a few things. He does two things. He takes a piece of wood, probably a broken music stand, and he hit it against the wall where the wall meets the floor. And he tucked the piece of wood in that corner space. And so when he comes into the room later, he takes that piece of broken music stand and he wedges it between the wall and the door so nobody can come in behind him. Right? So he barricades that door. Then the other thing he did was he drilled a little peephole through this door. And so the first time I heard this part of the story, it really creeped me out. The play is My American Cousin, and Booth knew the play. And he planned this down to the tiniest detail. He knows exactly what moment he wants to shoot Lincoln. He's waiting for a moment when he knows there's only going to be one actor on the stage, and he's going to deliver one of the funniest lines of the play. And the audience will be laughing, and there'll only be one person on stage. And that's the moment he's waiting for. So imagine he gets into that little room, and he's looking through the people, and he's looking at President Lincoln, the back of President Lincoln's head, and reciting the play in his head, waiting for his moment. And then he hears it, right? There's two women on the stage, they're having an argument in the play, and the mother and daughter in the play storm off, and there's one actor who's comes up behind the president and points the gun right at the back of his head. Delivers it. Now,
That was
you
hilarious.
know, people moving around all
Why
the
does
time
he
when
sound
you're
like
watching
my
a movie or
grandpa?
watching a play, but for whatever reason, Lincoln ducks forward just a little bit at the moment Booth pulls the trigger. So he's not killed instantly, but the bullet goes in right behind his left ear. It will actually travel through his brain and lodge behind his right eye,
Dog.
the orbital bone. So he's gonna die. It's a mortal wound, right? But at first, all that happens is his head just slumps forward. And so there's this heartbeat where nothing happens. The audience doesn't know anything's wrong. And nobody in the booth, they hear this loud sound, but they don't really know what it was. And then Mary Todd looks at her husband, he slumps forward, and it all registers. And she starts screaming. Major Rathbone jumps up. Major Rathbone jumps up. Booth has his knife. Booth has that knife. This one here is probably not the one involved, right? So he has a knife. You're unarmed.
That's so unfair.
He jumps up and rushes at Booth. Booth slashes down and cuts Major Rathbone from the shoulder to the elbow down to the bone. So he's out of the fight, right? They struggle for another second. Booth disengages, runs to the edge of the balcony, and leaps off the balcony onto the stage.
Breaks his leg.
Yep. His spur hits some of that extra bunting or that portrait of George Washington. And he lands awkwardly on the stage. Runs to the middle of the stage. Right? The audience still doesn't know what's going on. Imagine you're in the audience, you look, you go, oh, there's the famous actor, John Wilkes Booth. Is this part of the play? This is weird. Waves the bloody knife in the air and yells, Sic semper tyrannis, which is the motto of Virginia, and it means, so it is to tyrants. And now this is one of those points, there are over 100 people in the audience. Most people say he yelled Sic semper tyrannis. Some people say he yelled, the South is avenged. Some people say he yelled, it is done. It doesn't matter, right? He yells something, he goes running off the stage, a couple of people run up to try to stop him, he basically waves a bloody knife in their face and they back off, goes back out in the alley, climbs up onto his horse, hits Peanut on the head with the end of the knife. Poor Peanut. Peanut winds up in jail, just for holding John Wilkes Booth's horse. He will not wind up going to prison or anything, but he does get arrested and get put in jail for a time just for holding the horse.
But it was just John Wilkes Booth, the
I
famous
know!
actor.
It's the exact John Wilkes Booth. So now,
Then when he
everything just goes crazy in the theater. Right? Mary Todd Lincoln and Clara Harris start yelling, the president's been shot. But they can't get in. He barred the door. So a bunch of men climb up onto the stage and they actually lift Army Surgeon Charles Leal, lift him from the stage up into the booth. So doctor rules, he's the first doctor on the scene. Abraham Lincoln is his patient. So he goes up to the president and at first they don't know exactly what's wrong with him. So they have to examine him. So they take him out of the rocking chair and they lay him on the floor. Good job. They lay him on the floor. Now they saw that Booth had a knife, so they start looking for stab wounds. And so they actually cut the president's shirt open and they're looking and there's no wounds and there's no blood. Remember the bullet didn't come out the front of his head, so it's just a small wound behind his ear. And there's not even a lot of blood coming out of it because there's a clot there. So Dr. Leal checks his body, can't find anything, so he runs his fingers through the president's hair and then he feels it. Feels the hole. president's breathing is very shallow and irregular. So he realizes there's pressure on his brain. So he takes his finger and sticks it in the bullet hole and removes the blood clot. And that relieves the pressure, and the president breathes a little easier.
So he did a good job.
Yeah. Throughout that night, every so often, Dr. Leal will have to remove that clot to get the pressure off of the president's brain. Now they know it's a mortal wound, but they can't figure out what to do with it. And again, the scene is chaotic, right? So here's one of the weird side stories. Laura Keene is the actress starring in the play, right? She makes her way up, after they finally get the doors open, she makes her way up, she walks into the booth. She asks the doctor and the people present, she says, "Can I hold him?" And they say yes. So you know Mary Todd's out of it because she was usually very jealous. So you know she's just sobbing in the corner and not really paying attention because they allow Laura Keene, she gets down on the floor and spreads out her dress and cradles the dying president's head for a few moments. And then lays him down and leaves. Yeah, it's just weird. She keeps the dress. For years after, she would get it out and show it to people. Look, here's the dress I was wearing when I cradled the dying president's head.
Doesn't take on that for a feeling.
And we don't have the dress anymore, but at some point she started cutting pieces of the dress off and giving them away as like souvenirs.
For money?
No, just like family, friends, and stuff like that. Right? So now we're back in the booth, and they got to figure out what to do with the president. They don't want him to die on the floor of the theater. He's not going to make it back to the White House. So they decide they got to get him out of the theater. He's about 6'4". And they got to get him out of that booth, down the stairs, and out of the theater. So it was definitely not dignified, but as much as they could with as little jostling as possible. They carry him out into the street. They get him out into the street, they're still not sure what they're going to do with him. And there's a guy staying in the Peterson house across the street, that's the lower picture. And he says, "Bring him here, bring him here." And so they bring him into the Peterson house, and there's a small bedroom downstairs. And they lay him in the bed, and the bed is too small for him. They have to lay him diagonally across this bed. And now it's just a death watch, right? They're just waiting. Eventually, Secretary of War Stanton will basically run the government from that room while they're waiting for President Lincoln to die, basically. And he starts the largest manhunt in American history up to that point. Question. They don't know, was Booth acting alone? Was he under orders from the South? Is the South going to attack now? Is the Confederate Army waiting to attack Washington, D.C. in this moment of weakness? And so this whole city becomes paranoid the days immediately after. Question. How much time we got?
Like less than a minute.
Wait, we have Jumpstart too.
Oh, that's true.
Hey, tell I got it.
Dog, no.
We'll finish it on Monday. But
3,
Booth
2.
is riding out of Washington, D.C. And remember, no cell phones, no radio, no television, nothing like that. So the city doesn't know what's going on yet. Booth rides up to the Navy Yard Bridge. And the guard there is not supposed to let anyone out of the city after 9 o'clock. At this point, it's after 11 o'clock. He rides up to the guard and he says, "Oh, I was waiting for the moon so I could see." And the guard says, "You're not supposed to go, but okay, I'll let you go." And raises the gate and lets Booth out of the city. So we'll start a 12-day manhunt for John Wilkes Booth, and I'll tell you what happened to him on Monday.